Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 160. My name is Dani Beaumont. I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Muse team. Thanks for joining us here today. Today is an extra special day because when you have a baby, let's see, usually the people say, how old's your baby? You say, oh, it's 9 months. Oh, it's 11 months. And like, oh, how old is she? She's already crawling. Like, oh, she's only 18 months. Muse is 36 months old today. Otherwise known as Muse is 3 years old. So happy birthday to Muse. The significance there, I've worked on the product. I worked with it we were in beta for a year, and I worked with it about a half a year before that. So I've been on it about 4.5 years, which is shocking. And so much has happened with this application. We're in the throes of our 12th update to the product. We shoot to update it every 3 or 4 times a year. And we've delivered on that around the subscription promise. And even as I reflect about the topic today on preparing assets for Muse, it's changed a lot year over year, month over month. So happy birthday to Muse, and let's go ahead and get started with the session. As we work, I am joined by at least one person from the team. Dave Bernard is one of our engineers. And there are other folks that tend to come to these jam sessions that are going to help out with chat. You're welcome to talk about anything you want. If you want to make sure I pay attention to a question that's specific to what we're covering, please be sure to go ahead and put it in the presenter's pod there, and I will glance over at that. And Dave and Brad, if you see a question come up that you think I do need to address, copy it to the clipboard for me, and when I swing back through, throw it into chat to get my attention would be great. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. So we had a question while we were getting ready around Muse and mobile and Google. So Google made a significant change, I guess it was April 21st, it says what I'm looking at here, around how it does SEO for sites. And it now takes seriously into consideration if you have a mobile layout for your site. And if you don't have a mobile layout, if you have just a desktop design, it does affect your search ranking. So if you are curious about this, I encourage you to go to blogs.adobe.com/Muse. I can even put this into the chat real quick so that you have it handy. But there is a good article from our engineering team that speaks about it. There's also a terrific article that Steve Harris of musethemes.com, so one of our oldest widget and template developers. Steve worked closely with How and the Muse team to write an article about some tips and tricks for looking at what Google is doing and focusing on web design. I think the other place I would point you to is if you're not familiar with 123muse.com, this is an online magazine. Chris Kellett, who was formerly of Muse Grid, has been with 123muse since the beginning of the year pretty much. He does a monthly magazine. I think the price is about $60 a year, or about $5 an edition by my math. But his 5th edition that just came out is all about mobile. He has widgets that he includes with his articles, step-by-step tutorials. You're welcome to click on in and you can read one of the articles in each edition for free and then decide if you want to subscribe. But these are all great places to learn about the mobile world as it evolves. And I also saw in the chat that people want to talk about responsive and how Muse is doing there. Muse uses a method known as alternate layouts. It allows you to design a unique layout for desktop, tablet, and smartphone. At the same time, the web is evolving, and we're looking at ways to try to allow you to more easily design for the web and not lose the beauty of Muse and the simplicity with which you design while we adapt to all of these devices, platforms, and browsers that are out there. So rest assured that the Muse team is thinking about it and continuing to iterate and improve what we're doing with the tool. Let's see. So there is a question about images and tiling and HiDPI. I think I'm going to cover that as we talk today. But let's go ahead and dive in with Muse, and I'm going to kind of take it down to some of the basics. The good thing is if you're watching the recording, you can scrub to the good parts if you're familiar with all of this. But in its most basic sense, and I even have cheat sheet notes here, so if you are looking at the YouTube recording, you're going to want to type this in to your browser. If you're looking at Connect, you can just click this link. But it's a series of resources, just notes for myself as we talk. And I begin with best practices. I always think that's important. So you as a Muse designer are like any other web designer. You just don't have to worry about the code. It's not your problem. The engineering team from Muse, they worry about making sure what you design is consistent across browsers and platforms. Your job at the same time is to make sure that you are adhering to best practices around design for the web. And if you grew up in print, or if you're new to the web or technology in general, really stopping to understand different image source types and look at the process that you use to build out your sites. So just a bit of a perspective here for a moment. Muse is built by the same team that originally built InDesign, many of the same engineers, and we've carried that paradigm forward to laying out for the web as though you were laying out for print. That paradigm actually relates very closely to web design as well. So chances are, if you went to school and you studied design or web design, you were probably taught to comp up your website using a tool like Photoshop. And that's terrific, but in some ways I challenge you to change your workflow. In that, if you think, let's say the first time you did a brochure for a client, a print brochure, let's say, and in it you had a logo, and the logo had an image, and it had text, and then you had additional text in your design. You're probably not going to go typeset the whole brochure in Photoshop, only to throw it away, grab the images, and recreate it in a layout application like InDesign. What you probably do is say File New in InDesign, think about the structure of your site, and yes, when you want to integrate images and text, you perhaps created illustrations in Illustrator, had photography in Lightroom or Photoshop that you optimized, and then you really integrated or brought those elements together within your layout application. Now, many designers still build out a comp in Photoshop that they show to their client, and when the client signs off on it, they then build it out using Muse. I'm curious about your evolution, if you would agree with me or if you stick with that workflow, in that Muse is such a great wireframing, structural building tool that allows you to skin and style elements as time evolves, such that you really don't need to start in a throwaway application like Illustrator or Photoshop. But we do sort of explore some of that in these best practices. So what's the best tool for you to build out your concepts? How can you iterate quickly? How can you communicate your concepts to your client? And we've done jam sessions on wireframing and prototyping. I think that's always an evolving concept as more and more interface designers are empowered to build out full experiences on the web. But a beautiful part about Muse is you can have a working prototype, an interactive comp that you get sign off from your client that you can then evolve rather than throw away when you build it out and its functionality. Now, stepping back also for a moment, we're going to get to the good part really quickly. Let's just talk about file formats and types. So as we look at the list, you're probably all familiar with this, but there is TIFF, which is it's a tag information file format. It probably was established 30 years ago. I don't know if anyone even knows about it. PDF, portable document format, that is a container that you can use to download files like a menu or a resume from a website, but you're not going to really work with PDF. Kind of a dark, deep secret, perhaps, not really, is that Illustrator's native file format is pretty much one and the same as PDF. So it's very easy to open a PDF in Illustrator, for example, and then save out aspects as SVG, depending on what was placed in that original PDF or Illustrator file and what data is retained. But if you're working in Illustrator and you have vector content or content that is Bezier, that's resolution independent, if you think about things like text or typography, fonts tend to be resolution independent, and based on the output device, they'll scale up to an optimal resolution. Scalable vector graphics, or SVG, is the modern day Bezier or vector format that works well on the web. So as many of you know, when Adobe first started using something like Illustrator, and you wanted to take Illustrator and print to a PostScript device, we had a beautiful world where Adobe owned the platform known as PostScript. It was our standard. We also owned Illustrator. It was a very closed loop. So if we wanted to create some new Bezier curve, we had total control over that. The web is very different in that it's an open standard. The beauty of that is that the whole community, the whole world evolves those standards very, very quickly. The downside is, as a designer, trying to keep track of every browser that's out there, every platform that it runs on, every device that it runs on, every operating system is overwhelming. I don't know how a hand coder would do it these days. And the beauty with Muse is that we worry about that. As a result, though, you'll find there are features you're like, come on, Muse team, get with the program. Why don't you, for example, allow you to put a shadow on text? That came up in conversation. The reason for that is that it takes specific code to make sure that that shadow is going to behave consistently across even browsers as old as Internet Explorer and across Android devices on a mobile device, things of that sort. So as we kind of take the machete and cut through the woods to figure out where we can take users, it's usually a lot more complicated than the traditional world about print because of the open standards. So what you're going to want to do as you're working is really begin with, can I generate it in vector first? And in doing that vector work, what format does it take? So let's stop with all the talk and take a little bit of a look. So I'm going to come into a brand new file. It's always a great way, if you're not a coder like me, to get a sense of what Muse is doing in the code to start with as little as possible for a moment. So as you work, let's go ahead and head towards the live instance of the Ike's Bike Shop website. So we're going to play with some assets here. And I'd like to sort of describe what we're looking at, what's going on. What we have is a number of items, right? I've got, for example, a background fill here that is just a solid color. I have an image, this bicycle, that also includes a glow. And the bicycle is scrolling at a different speed than the rest of the site. But it's a nice photo that has a glow included with it, so it has a transparent background. One of the basic rules is that PNG or PNG formats can be of varying size. You can have an 8-bit, a 16-bit, 24-bit PNG. If it's a fireworks PNG, it can have vector and image content in it. But PNGs tend to be slightly larger than JPEGs, but PNGs can preserve transparency. So for an image like this, I would likely save it as a PNG because I want the transparency to be present so that that background color, the yellow, will come up as I'm working. I have text that's here. So depending on what I'm doing with my text, I'll probably want to try to typeset it within Muse and work with fonts that are available to me within Muse. There may be cases where I want to do some special effects to my text. So if you look at the Ike's Bike Shop logo here, as I zoom in on it, kind of crazily large, you'll notice that it seems to be a typeface. If I come in, I can select text here. I can't select the text there. And as I drag it off, it lets me know that this is a graphic element. It's not created within Muse. Now, many of you would know I could probably work with a font that by design has this inline stroke. But to try to type this nicely on a curve, we don't have that feature in Muse. Probably won't have it very soon. So this is an example of an element that I do want to remain vector or resolution independent, so that no matter how large I make it on my screen, it's going to always scale up accordingly and be as small as possible. So for that, I went in, and that is generated using SVG, which is a file format that Adobe Illustrator will support. And the Illustrator file format, I don't know what I've done to my site here. Interesting. Let's go back where we were and stop zooming in quite so much. Let's see. Very interesting. I've jumped over to the mobile version of this site, which is always kind of fun. Let's try to open this up one more time. and continue to work here a little bit. Okay, I'm here, I promise. Okay, so let's kind of just take a look at some of the bits further that we have on this site. So I have some interesting design elements here. These are honestly rectangles, the wonderful shape that you can draw within Muse, rotated so that I can load them very quickly. It's line art that's there. I have other elements on the page. If we look towards the bottom, I've got this interesting angled footer. And that footer is going to span the width of the browser. So if I resize here, it's nice and large. And notice how it's even moving up and down. It has a nice behavior there. I have a logo down here that as well is probably SVG. It's vector content. Up at the top, interestingly enough, I have 3 little logos here, and we're going to talk about these. These are kind of social buttons. And there's a couple different approaches you can take for social buttons, and I want to talk about those. But let's look at how we would assemble just these page elements in Muse. All right, good with that. Let's go back to Muse. All right, to begin with, I'm going to be a little lazy here, maybe. I'll play a little bit more. Let's say I was actually designing this site. I'm going to come in and be lazy and just grab a little screenshot because I want to pick on some of the colors here rather quickly. I'm going to come into Muse and I'm just going to paste that down. Perhaps. I switched machines this week, so some things are still a bit of a mystery to me. All right, I've just grabbed a shot from the web, and my intention for that is really just to be able to pick up on some of the colors. So I'm going to go on in and define my browser fill, and I'll select that nice dark shade of yellow. And for good measure, I'm going to create a swatch here and fill it with just a shade of gray. I'll grab that. Perhaps. And go ahead and get rid of that source image. And let's go ahead and use this shade of gray here. I'm going to draw a nice half container here about halfway in through the site and move that down a little bit. I've got a footer defined, but for now we'll get by with what we've got here. All right, so as I'm working, let's look at some of these pieces. We'll go ahead and start with the logo, which is pretty straightforward. So as you work, there's a couple things to keep in mind. If you can keep it as vector content, absolutely do so. If you can define the attribute within your site, definitely a good methodology. So if we look at the live site, we've got navigation up at the top of the page. That navigation is set within Muse. So within Muse here, I could come on in and let's say I add a couple pages. We've got a home page, products. We've got services and contact. And what I can do is come in and create a menu here. Now the menu that I work with can be manual or automatic. This one is automatic. It has styling that's been by default defined just to allow me to understand how menus work. But I could come in and clear out all the styles for all these elements and fiddle around. What I want to do is go ahead and select a nice font. So we'll go with Lead Gothic at the moment and just define those attributes there. So I now have just a menu. The nice parts here is if I change my mind and decide that services should be before products for some reason, because that is a dynamic menu, it's going to update appropriately. So services is now in a new location. And this is resolution independent. It's going to be as small as possible. Now, depending on the typefaces that I'm working with, there can be some overhead associated with that. So if I select this object and look at what I'm working with, I'm using a web font. So in our world, there are system fonts. Notice that it says export as image. You want to think of these as very bad. So they are bad because they are going to flatten out at a screen resolution, and they're going to load up just like images when a viewer of your site looks at that design. Now, there was a question about HiDPI versus standard DPI, and I do want to explain that a little bit. We offered support for high resolution devices some time ago. And when you're working, I've had sort of a whole full jam session on this, but we can cover some of the basics, I think, today. When you're working in Muse, I can pull that under File to Site Properties here, and I can decide under Content, what should the resolution of my site be? Now, by default, it's going to be standard. If I go with HiDPI, I was afraid of this feature. I think I said we shouldn't do it. Good thing they didn't listen to me, because once we did it, it was very painless in its implementation. The way HiDPI works is images that you place within Muse need to be twice the resolution. So instead of 72 DPI, you need to design them at 144 DPI, or screen resolution of 2x. When you place them in Muse, it's going to place at 50% of actual size. This is really kind of a brain meld. So if you still are working in, let's say, Photoshop, and you want to design your site in Photoshop, when you say File New in Photoshop, you're going to want to make sure that the resolution that you define for your Photoshop file is 144 pixels in resolution. Or if you're designing at 72 DPI, because that's where you are, that's what your source is, change the view within Photoshop to be 50% of actual size. And that's going to simulate what the HiDPI behavior is going to be like for you. I can go ahead and define this as a HiDPI site, and really nothing I've done so far is going to change. To be honest, it's going to have no relevance on the text that I've typeset, because HiDPI, low DPI, we always serve up the same font, and that font is going to always render at the highest resolution for the device and browser that is looking at that particular page. So that's all good. That's not going to really change in any way. But let's talk about some of the elements that would. So I'll go ahead and close that out, and I've now got a little bit of navigation up on the top. Let's be a little kind to myself and create a bit of a white area to work with as well. So I'm just going to come on in here and define a container. It's not going to look like much. I'm going to ask that it be 100% width, so it spans the width of the site. Press and drag it up on the top here, and then arrange it to the back, so that I've just got a bit of a white container for Lazy Man's design process here. Let's see what's going on now. I've got no master, a master. Did I fill that with white? Maybe not. I'm going to select the object and then go in and define the fill color as white, so that now in my little master I've at least got white for my header area. Okay, let's talk now about icons as you work. You really have a few different choices. And again, as Muse has evolved, those choices have changed in my book. If I want to work with icons, so if I look at the social icons that are on the live site, just somewhere here, let's see. Did you go away? So I've got some icons here, and if I zoom in on the icons really, really tight, maybe tighter than I can, they are resolution independent. So they will scale dynamically. I could place them very, very large on the site, and they're going to load very quickly and be resolution independent. Now, the advantage there is that they load really easily. The disadvantage is, to be honest, I had to select the color that I wanted for these vector elements, this SVG artwork, in Illustrator. So one of the requirements when you work with SVG is that you colorize your elements in the source application, in this case Illustrator. I cannot apply color when I'm working with Muse. So there is a backdoor, a very different way to go that I do want to explain for a moment. Let's go on in and say File Place, and let me go ahead and grab the SVG instances of those images just so we can see our first example. So they're going to be around here somewhere. Let's try this. All right, so I've got a little blog icon, I've got a bike icon. Let's grab these two items, click on Open, and I'm just going to click and release to place them. So I got these two guys. Now they are SVG. When I go to place them, you may see a little spinning wheel for a moment. That's because we're really allowing the SVG to render that image. So if I drag here, we're going to re-render the image. It takes a moment to do that, but I can scale it as large as I'd like. Now, if I want to apply a color to this item, I'm kind of stuck. So if I come in and I say, wow, I really want you to be this fabulous shade of red, I can define the color for the container, but I can't really colorize the graphic. Now, if you don't know what color you're going to want to use for your social icons, what you can do is take a different, rather old-fashioned approach. So I have another set of icons here that are, let's see, icon examples. So if I look here for a moment, I have some icons that are saved out as PNG. So notice they've got the PNG extension. They were basically saved out as transparent ping, and they're a specific size. So this is a 72 DPI instance of this graphic. And if I come in and select 2 or 3 of these, click open and press and drag them, or just click and release them on the canvas. Keep in mind that I did something interesting when I changed the resolution of this site. So let's take a look at that. In the Assets panel, I've just gone in and selected 3 graphics and I've placed them. Now when I place them, if I were to come in here and drag the edge a little bit, what you'll see is I'm at exactly 50% of actual size. That is because I said this site should be HiDPI, and the rule for us is that we will render a standard instance and a HiDPI instance of any one placed image as long as we have it scaled to 50% or less. So, sorry, these are, no one said this was a sexy jam session. This is a nitty-gritty jam session. If I come in and I grab a second instance of my little bird here, and I press and drag it to be, let's say, 84% of actual size, and then click off of it. Notice an interesting thing happened here. I've got my social RSS feed, I've got my Google Plus icon, I've got my little bird, Twitter, but there's 2 instances of the bird. One is 2x, that means it's going to render at both HiDPI and standard resolution. The second one is not 2x. And that's because I've sized it larger than 50%. Muse realizes, or I've indicated to Muse, you know what? You don't need to give me a high-res instance of this graphic. And that is known to Muse because it's set at 50% or greater, or actually 51%. So I will get just a standard version of this bird. Now you're saying to yourself, Dani, you've got these cool SVG graphics on the left. Why the heck do we want to get bound with resolution-dependent files that perhaps are going to load more slowly? And the specific reason for that is it's really easy to colorize them using a color palette in your design. So I can come into these objects. Let's cheat a little bit here and see if we can grab. I'm going to grab an image from the site and just pick up on some of those colors real quickly here. So if I come back out, let's grab this little gear. And I'm going to press and drag it into place. Notice that this is a very high resolution image, so I'm placing it at 18% of actual size. And in doing that, that gear is 2x, so it knows it has enough resolution to be HiDPI. But for my little icons here, I'd like to colorize them, and I want to pick up on a particular color because I'm being lazy and I'm sort of designing in Muse, and I don't want to bother in Illustrator to go in and define these colors. What I can do is with these objects selected, in fact, I'm going to show you this a little more robustly. I'll go in and select one of them. I'm going to come into Effects and go to, oddly enough, Glow. And for the glow, I'm going to go ahead and select a color. Now I've sort of jumped a little too quickly here. Let's step back for a moment. What I'm going to do is create a little container, and I'm going to select Fill. I'm going to grab this little eyedropper tool, and I'm going to grab a color. Not the best color. It's looking a little peachy, isn't it? Let's try a little darker. All right, I've got this nice shade of brown. I'm going to come in and create a swatch, and I'll call that nice brown. I'm giving it a named color value. That allows me to go in and change the color later if I'd like, because I've named it. It's not based on the RGB value, it's based on the name now, is identifying that. Now it looks like I've accidentally applied a little something to my object here already. So let's go back into the effects panel, go back to glow. Glow is checked there. It's got a little odd little halo going on. Don't get nervous. What I'm going to do is go in and select that nice brown color. Look, it's looking even more awful. I'm going to set opacity to about 100% and blur to about 250, which I think is the max you can set. And then here's the magic. I'm going to define it as an inner glow. So effectively what I've done is filled this image object with a color, a named color. Now if I go to my swatches panel and clear out anything that's not being used, I have this one little named color here. What I can do is go to my graphic styles and create a graphic style with the object selected, and I'm going to call this icon color. And now what I can do, once I've set this up, I can go to any of these image files that I've got and just apply that graphic style to the selected object. Now the cool part about that is, let's say you're building templates, or you know that you want to be able to change the overall color scheme of your design from time to time. Now these icons are lovely, but that's kind of a terrible color. So what I can do is simply go to my swatches panel now. So nothing up my sleeve, nothing selected at the moment. These could be anywhere in the site. I'm going to come into that value and go to swatch options and say, wow, that's pretty awful. Let me try to pick up instead on this lovely, heck, I don't know. We'll find a lovely shade of blue. It's a nice warm shade of blue. Now I've named it nice brown, which might confuse us all, but when I go on in and click OK, the magic that happens is by changing that swatch, it's changing all instances of the graphic style that's been applied to this object. Now, if I just went into my SVG objects here, I'd have to go out to Illustrator, change the color, and come back. So it's a bit of a toss-up. What does this mean from a resolution standpoint? If I come in and preview in browser, and we get a little nauseous again and zoom all the way into this corner, what you'll see is the RSS logo here is clean and beautiful and light. And the RSS logo here is starting to look a little fuzzy. Now, if I placed it as I did as a high DPI image, it's going to render pretty nicely. This one's looking pretty rough because it's got some nice round edges. But at standard resolution, chances are it's going to behave pretty well. So if I come into actual size, from a load time standpoint, if you have an SVG, it's going to load once and then it's going to repeat across the world. In the instance of images, it's going to need to render both the high DPI instance and the standard instance, but it's going to intelligently load those. So let's step back a little bit and just look at images in general and how we handle high DPI. So I've got this image that I placed here, and I may even have a good little quick demo for this. Let me look real quickly. As I said, I've changed computers, and so I lost some of my shortcuts, but let's see. HiDPI. There we go. I am a vaguely organized person, maybe. All right, let's talk HiDPI real quickly. Let's go ahead and clear out most of what we got here. All right. I'm going to keep them around for, let's delete it. We can live without it. Okay. I'm going to go in and place a number of different elements. So HiDPI here, oh, those are the wrong ones, but that's okay. I was feeling so proud. Let's try that one more time, see, and then I'll give up. All right. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll be with you in a moment. It's not that. I don't know. I'm not as organized as I thought. I've failed you people. It's okay. We can simulate it pretty quickly. All right. I'm going to grab a couple of elements from my set here. And let's see. What we want to do is deal with photos now. So I'm going to grab a crank and an adapter. Click open. And And I'm going to press and drag it into position and make sure that as I'm placing it, I don't go over 50%. Come to this guy and keep him under 50%. So I've got two elements here. For the purposes of testing, I don't know how much this occurs in nature, but as I'm testing, if you want to see what's going on in your life with HiDPI, in the widgets library there's a button called HiDPI on and off. You can change the graphics here so they're not so terrible. These are just default graphics that we have defined as fill colors here, but it serves a nice purpose. And it's going to let you know on a device that supports HiDPI if you have those higher res images turned on or off. Now I'm going to come in here and make my life a little easy because I know what I'm about to do, and I'm going to pin that. And let's just jazz this up slightly more by going back to some of those icons and bringing those into play too. Grab a bird and a heart. And let's get these all jumbled into this tight little corner. And what I want to do is go ahead and pull that on file to preview site in browser. And what you'll notice is if I zoom in tightly here so I can see a little bit more my objects, let's go in as tight as possible. Now you can see why I pinned my little button. Right now what I'm looking at is the standard resolution of these images. I can tell that because this HD, I have a Retina MacBook, so that the resolution that we're seeing is high resolution. It's a HiDPI or a Retina display. I've turned off the HiDPI, and what you want to do is look at this little piston thing, whatever that is. It's a thing that, you know, adds air to a tire. Keep an eye on that and its edges and the fuzzy nature of this image. When I click this button, I don't know if you'll see it over Connect, but when I click it, HiDPI is turned on. And what happens is rather quickly there's a conversation that takes place with the website, and it's going to load the higher res instance of those images in the background asynchronously. So as I was talking, it went in and it said, okay, great, I've got the standard version of this image. I'm going to go ahead when there's bandwidth and grab the larger version of the image, and asynchronously, without refreshing the page, I'm going to add it back in. So if I come in and click that off again, see how fuzzy it was? Click it on again, give it a second, 2, 3, 4. There you go. In the background, without too much fuss, it brought in the higher res versions. So the way HiDPI works is if you have that double resolution available, you're going to pick and choose what requires the higher resolution. You may have beautiful images that really are showcased that you want to be HiDPI, and then other images that really aren't as relevant. If you do not want the image to be HiDPI, make sure when you place it, it's placed at more than 50% so that it will not render the HiDPI instance in the other, as well as the standard version. Now we had a question in the audience before the session started that spoke about background images. And there's a level to this that I know and then I get a little confused, so I may lie a little bit. But from what I understand, for HiDPI, when you're defining a background image, I don't think we're able to toggle between standard and HiDPI because we don't know exactly how large that image is going to be rendered. So I believe as a default, you're always going to use the higher res version. And let me give you an example of this. If I come in and I decide I want to have a container on the page, I'm going to go ahead and define it as a 100% width object, so it's going to span the width of the browser. And I'll go ahead and move it up in place here a little bit. And I'm going to go define a background fill. I'm going to come grab one of my images that I have for the site. And I want something that's a little on the big side. So I need to know that it has enough image content. In fact, let's just go in and kind of sort a little bit by my size. Obviously we have some big stuff here. All right, this big lovely gear wheel thing. So I've placed it now, and what I want to do is have, instead of original size, I want it to scale to fill the container. And just for fun, I'll go on in and define a scroll effect of, let's say, 0.8 times the speed of scroll, just to give it kind of a little bit of a romantic effect here. When I bring up that browser, wow, it's so large. It's because this is viewed really large. Let's go to actual size. Okay, so here is my web page. Got a little gap going on there. But notice as I resize this background, it's scaling larger. Now, because Muse does not know exactly how large you're going to get, if you are on a 44-inch monitor or something, and we're playing with this page, I believe the way we behave is we're going to go ahead and save this out as the highest resolution possible. Now, the way you can find out for yourself in your own examples is pull down on File, to export as HTML. Create a little folder on your desktop. So desktop, new folder, delete me, select choose, make up a domain because it doesn't really matter. That is for creating a site plan in case you're going to FTP the content up yourself to your own location. Back to the desktop here, delete me. Let's take a look at what's going on. So we know we have these items. If we come in and view page source, we may have gone behind my little coding mind here. Notice we've got images air adapter PNG, and then we have in HiDPI instances images air adapter 2x PNG. So we render two images there. We've got the standard instance and then the 2x instance. And that's that second image that we're going to render or bring up. Now, just to kind of roll things all around and totally confuse you, if English is not your first language, I'm sorry about the order that my jam sessions go in. It's kind of the order of my mind. But let's talk about SVG. We've spoken about how it's really great when you're placing images and they're scalable and they only render once. But there is a downside to them. So let's say I come on in here and I grab a logo. So I've got the really swell Ike's logo. Let's do the one that's got some text in it. So I've got this SVG instance of my bike shop, nice and large and clean. And I'll come in and place it. I can scale it down, no degradation. It's going to always scale up or scale down to adapt to my device. If I put it on a mobile device, a tablet, smartphone, it's going to load in a lovely way. But the downside is if I want to make sure that this item has SEO, has some search engine text, let's say a screen reader, someone's visually impaired, they roll over this to know what it is. And then also if Ike's Bike Shop needs to appear in the HTML code, I'm going to want to make sure I make a reference to that. So what you're going to want to do when you place SVG content, rather than typing out the words Ike's Bike Shop, you're going to right mouse on that object and go to Edit Image Properties. And what you're able to do is define an alt tag or alternate text. And I might say Ike's Bike Shop, San Francisco, and click OK. The way this will manifest, if I go in and preview in the browser now and view my page source, and just do a find real quickly here for the word Ike. Notice here I've got that SVG logo. It's only occurring once, so there's not a 2x, a 3x, a 10x. There's just one instance of that logo, but there's alt tags or alternate text describing what's there, Ike's Bike Shop. So my Google search engine, for example, is going to pick up on that image because I've defined an alt tag for that item. All right, a lot of monologue going on here. I'm going to stop and see how chat is going. Looks like Brad's got everything handled, which is beautiful. Dennis is giggling because I'm pressing and dragging probably. Lord knows. Any questions for me? I'll look at the question answer below. Yes, I'm reading. Right, that first question here, when I specify a tile as a browser fill in Muse, you don't have the option to place it at 50%. I would suggest that to be safe, you're going to create it at the higher resolution. So what you want to say to yourself is, to be reasonable in a browser, what is the maximum size you expect this to look good at? And how can I work with that? Let's talk about another kind of interesting aspect of Muse. So usually Muse is right, but sometimes Muse is not always right. And early on in the early days of Muse, folks might take a 10 megapixel image, some incredibly large image, and place it within Muse. And you may not realize that, heck, that's really good for print, but it's terrible for the web. So what we do is automatically take large images. If you came in and placed an image and you scale it to 25% of actual size, by definition, so let's say this image here, even though the original instance of this image is rather large, we're going to automatically go in and analyze the image. We're going to subsample it to standard and, if relevant, 2x times standard. And we're going to look at the type of image that's there. We notice it has transparency, so we're going to automatically save it as PNG with transparency preserved. And we're subsampling that image. We're not going to keep all the data if it's 4 times what you need for the web. We'll keep the 2x and the standard instance, and we just do that in the background. If you know a lot about images and you do not want Muse to touch what you're doing, you get annoyed because perhaps it's a little fuzzy or there's some color transformation that you find to be really irritating, what you want to do is when you place an object, let's see if I can grab something new here. Another air fitsy thing. If I click and release to place it, so just simply click and release. I did not press and drag. That was kind of fast. Let's grab another one. I might not get so lucky with a good little image. Let's grab a wrench. So when I place this wrench, notice I have my little place gun. If I press and drag, that's one thing. You'll notice that as I press and drag, I'm getting the percentage scale here. If instead I click and release, what I'm doing is saying, you know what, Muse? I know exactly what I'm doing. Don't get in my way. Do not subsample, do not optimize, do not make fuzzy pixels. Just pass the image through. The best way to assure that we will pass it through is to make sure that in your source application, you define the image at 100% of what you expect it to be on the web. Okay? Here's another bizarre scenario, though, for a moment. So let's get most of this out of the way. And let's say I want to place an image, and for some bizarre reason, I want it to be really, really, really big, and I know better than the Muse team knows about an image. I don't even know why this is relevant in the world, but let's pretend for a moment you are going to be displaying on a 46-inch display, and you don't mind that it takes a while to load up the background image because it's going to be there all day and night because it's the kiosk in the client's lobby. How's that for a scenario? What I want to do is say File, pull down to Place, and I'm going to grab an incredibly large image. So I think I cooked the books here. So I called it Huge Wheels, and it's a very, very large image. I actually went into Fireworks and I doubled it to make it twice as large, so it's larger than it really has to be. But it's going to show off my example. So I'm going to go ahead and select Huge Wheel here. And I'm going to click and release to place it. So when I clicked and released to place it, let's just see. Yeah, my little game probably, yeah, okay. When I click and release to place it, this is 50% of actual size, which means it's pretty darn massive. Let me do something. All right, I'm going to say File, New, because I want to make this point pretty clear. Brand new document. I do not have HiDPI turned on. It's standard resolution. I come in and say, hey, I want that massively large file. Now notice this time, when I click and release, it's big. It's much bigger than my design canvas right here. Interestingly enough, though, it's only 2048 in width. Now, if I went back to my Fireworks original, I think I saved this out at 3,000 pixels in width. Muse automatically says, you know what, Dani, you probably don't know what you're doing, and this is the web, and an image that's any larger than that is going to be really, really heavy lifting, so we're going to make a decision for you that you're going to max out at 2048. If you still know better, if you're like, thanks for the favor, but I do know what I'm doing, this is for a large display, I need it to be more like 3,000 pixels in size. Let's go ahead and make it 2768, very, very large. Now what I've done is kind of blown that image out in size because I've dragged it larger than it was originally placed. What I need to do is if I right mouse on there, a very interesting thing happens. So what Muse decided on the fly when I pasted a very large image is it did me a favor. It says, you know what, 2068 is about the max that anybody ever really needs. So I'm going to ignore you, Dani, and I'm going to bring it in at that resolution. If I do know what I'm talking about, what I do is place the image, scale it to the larger size that I want, right mouse on the object, and in the Assets panel, select Import Larger Size. It's going to then go in and re-import the image and allow me to load it at an even larger size than it did originally. So now I've got good fidelity. I've got a very large, very clean image that is going to stay nice and crisp in the browser. Now, we do that because that's a bad thing to do, and if you don't know better, we don't want you to make the mistake and do that accidentally. You guys, I'm down to like about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to swing back and see how we are with time. The time just flew by. Random questions. When will in-browser editing support editing fonts and colors and gallery images? Excellent question. Soon, we hope. No news for that there, but we do know it's important. We do know it's important. It's complex when you start to have mixed CSS styles in containers on a hosting platform that gets pushed to any hosting platform when we don't have a known backend. So it's important for us, but we have not done it yet. How widespread is support for SVG? That's an excellent question. What I would suggest, and I've seen it, is if you go to the Google and just search for SVG support across browsers, there is some good documentation there. One of the engineers on our team loves to play with SVG and CSS, and I know he's been noodling with some additional SVG functionality. He's continuing to iterate. We're also working closely with the Illustrator team, and when you copy from the Illustrator application to the Muse design canvas, that clipboard, we're improving the quality of the SVG that's delivered there. So we're continuing to work as much as we can to try to deal with browser limitations, but you'll definitely want to check on the web to see which ones will support it and which won't. So questioning about where this question, we kind of covered it. If you have a very large file, should you scale it in Photoshop or scale it in Muse? I would personally put it in Muse, scale it to what I want, preview it in the browser, and look at it. If it seems to get fuzzy, if it's off by a pixel, if you're not in love with our subsampling, then go back to your source app and do it. But let Muse have a go at it first if you can. So what I consider an advanced Muse jam, where I show Photoshop and Illustrator things, I would, but at the same time, I don't have a lot of advanced skills myself, so I probably would need to learn from someone who does more production work. There is one thing I totally forgot I'm going to jump over and do real quickly, is as you're working, you can either place a file, an individual file. You can also place a PSD, which is awfully nice. So I have, let's see, in the icon examples here, I've got individual social items that are all individual PNGs that have been saved out separately, but that's kind of a pain. What I can do is save it as a layered PSD, and when I click on the layered PSD, I'm free to come in and import just the layer that I want. So I can just choose an individual Photoshop layer and just place that one item, that very, very tiny little item. Now, another whole world that's interesting and evolving that's kind of beyond me as well is Photoshop has something called generator or extract. Illustrator does as well. And these are wonderful tools that in your layers panel of the application, you can define, do you want a 2x instance or 1x instance? Do you want PNG transparency as part of the naming structure in the layers panel in Photoshop, for example? And that can be a terrific way. It will automatically generate your images to a folder that Muse keeps an eye on to just keep things in sync. So if you are a big Photoshop or Illustrator user, I encourage you to check out generator or extract. I think they're the same thing, having been renamed by Adobe recently. I could be telling secrets though too. Let's see. So when a site is exported to HTML local, when you publish again on BC, will it lose the sync and upload all sites like the first time? Generally speaking, when you use FTP, we keep a manifest, and the manifest keeps keeps track of changes locally and remotely. If you make a local change, it will make that change remotely, and it tracks it for you. If you export to HTML, there is no manifest, there is no tracking. So if you use your own third-party FTP tool, you've got to know what to delete and what to replace. It's probably the main reason why we built FTP natively into Muse, is the fact that people were getting confusing scenarios there. So built-in SVGs or built-in FTP is a good way to go. If you are exporting to an HTML folder, you can't rely on the manifest. All right, I'm going to switch to the closing pod. We're now doing jam sessions every other week so that I can have a bit of a break. In 2 weeks, we're going to do a tips and tricks session. So smart people that use Muse a lot are welcome to send me their favorite tip, because I need to make a fresh round on tips and tricks, but we're going to do that in 2 weeks. Let me know how the session went for you. I do hear you. There's always room for advanced sessions. And if there are particular topics that we didn't cover, let me know what they are. If there are other topics that you'd like to have, let me know. In the lower right-hand area, we'll see you again in 2 weeks. I will go grab the recording link for this session, and I'll be right back. So again, talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.